Welcome. The theme for this yin yoga practice will be the planet Mercury, the innermost planet to the sun in our solar system. As always, this practice will begin with a little bit of breath work and a warm-up, and then the main yin yoga sequence will include postures such as Eye of the Needle pose, Dragon pose, half shoelace pose, and butterfly, and then a little bit of integration and rest. So typical props that might be useful are pillows and blankets, possibly blocks or books, and possibly a strap. And by the way, this sequence in general is probably a good one for people who do a lot of running. So this practice starts with some typical groundwork and breath work and a little bit of a warm-up before we launch into the yin postures proper. So find a comfortable seat for a little bit of breath work, or I'm going to suggest wide-legged child's pose. Now if you don't like wide-legged child's pose, then maybe find some other way to sit. But for wide-legged child's pose, come to hands and knees. Bring your knees out to the side, maybe mat width apart. Maybe the big toes can touch, but they don't have to. And then allow your hips to sink back towards your heels until your hips stop, and then allow your torso to fold forward, extend your arms forward. Now this might be a little bit too uncomfortable, and we're wanting to be comfortable here at the beginning. So if you need to use some kind of support underneath your hips or your torso, feel free to use blankets and pillows underneath your torso to make this posture a little bit more comfortable. We'll be here for a couple of minutes or so. And allow yourself to soften. So you have to kind of get in touch and do a mental handshake with different parts of your body. See if they're under muscular tension, and see if you can allow that tension to ebb and to soften as you sink more deeply into this pose. Cultivate an awareness of your inner landscape and your outer landscape, so you can get in touch with the sounds in your immediate surroundings, the temperature, the textures of the room. And then the same thing inside. Notice your breath. So notice how everything kind of expands when you inhale and soften and sinks as you exhale. So in this posture, the backside of your torso is kind of open and exposed. So maybe that's a good place to visualize your breathing. So as you inhale, you feel the backside of your body kind of open and inflate just a tiny bit. And then as you exhale, all kinds of softens and sinks and relaxes here. So we'll do a few more breaths here, and if you wish, you can just enjoy your normal natural breath, or you can do what I call a kind of an even breath count, a 4-4 breath, which means when you inhale to a slow count of 4, and then when you exhale to that same slow cadence. So maybe on your next exhale a little bit more out, and then inhale to a slow count of 1, 2, 3. At the end of your inhale, 4, and then exhale to a slow count of 1, 2, 3, 4. We do that maybe 3 more times. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. I like to count backwards on the exhale. So 4, 3, 2, 1. A couple more times. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale one final time. In 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stay here for a couple of normal natural breaths, so no counting involved. Just let your body take over the count here for a moment. One more breath here. And then slowly begin to bring yourself up if you decided to come into a wide-legged child's pose. I like to call that pose Warrior 4 because it takes a lot of mental discipline to maintain that pose. Do come to a comfortable seat, and if you can come to a cross-legged seat, do so. Whatever you find you've crossed your legs, if you decided to take a cross-legged seat, cross them the other way. So undo the crossing, put the other foot in front or on top. Notice if that feels a little bit awkward, and if that feels a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, that's okay. If it feels painful, then go back to the way you were seated before. And it's okay to sit up on some height like I'm doing. Do a couple lateral bends and a twist before we get into the long held yin postures. So now that you feel rooted in your lower body, bring your hands on either side of your torso and then gently inhale and raise your arms in a big sweeping circle. Grow them long mentally, but also grow your torso nice and long too. So start with your sits bones and grow everything long through your fingertips. And then we'll laterally side bend over to the right side. So bring your right arm down, place your right hand on the ground, and then reach up and over with your left arm as you bend your torso over to the left. So you can stabilize yourself with the right arm. Reach up and stretch through that left shoulder until you're feeling enough pressure, a good stopping point here. And then press yourself back up. Bring that right arm back up towards the ceiling. Bring the left arm down to the ground and plant that left hand on the floor to stabilize yourself. And then reach up and over with the right arm to lengthen out through the right side body here. Maybe stay for a breath or two. And then inhale and slowly bring yourself back up. Maybe both arms come up, go long here. Now we'll twist. So as your arms come down, very gently twist to the right. Right arm comes behind you. Left arm maybe rests on your thigh or your knee. Inhale, grow up tall through your torso. Exhale and twist a little bit more deeply. Neck can be neutral, or if it's okay with your neck, you can look over that back shoulder here. Hold for a breath. Bring yourself back to center. Maybe start with hands on the floor, and then make that big sweeping circle again and grow tall, and then twist over to the left side here. Set yourself up, take your time. Find what really feels stable for you. Create a nice neutral spine by feeling like you're growing it long, and then maybe twist a little bit more deeply here. And then just notice how the twist feels. Notice where the stuckness, the pressure points are. And gently bring yourself back to center. And a little bit of a side twist here. And now we'll move into our first long-held yin posture, the first posture that we'll kind of reside in for a few minutes here. And this posture is called Eye of the Needle, and it's an outside hip opener for most of us, although some of us can feel it in different places. To do this posture, you make your way onto your back. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor about hip width apart, roughly speaking. Here, so this is how you start this posture. And then take your right thigh, bring your right thigh in towards your torso, and then bring your right knee out to the right, bring your right ankle, place it on the left thigh. So right knee is wide. This is the beginnings of Eye of the Needle. For some of us, we're already feeling some pressure and some stuckness here. If that's the case for you, this is your posture. This is Eye of the Needle, and you just stay here. For some of us, maybe to feel a little bit more oomph, you start bringing the left thigh, the left leg in towards your torso. So you're trying to hinge from the hip socket. The spine is trying to stay nice and neutral on the ground. And so you're trying to pull this in until everything kind of stops. So I've got my hands behind my thigh right now. If it's okay for you and your knee, you can have your hands in front of your shin like this. And then you can pull all you want to with your arms. That's yang, but we're trying to stay relaxed in the hips
to find the sticking point. So the muscles we're trying to relax our muscles in the legs and the hips to get into the connective tissue here. And then we'll stay here for a few minutes here. And again, if you need to feel more, you can yang in the arms. The upper body's in a yang state because the muscles are engaged. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you just need to hold everything in place. Another thing you can do in this pose to make it feel easier is, for some of us, we may need a little bit of height underneath our hips. So what you can do is you can take some sort of a prop, place it underneath your hips for a little bit of height. And then you might find that that makes the posture easier to maintain for a long period of time without having to really tug. Now my legs stay and I don't even need to use my arms to keep the shape here because of the shifted position, the height underneath my hips here. So you might find that useful here. Otherwise, soften, relax. We have about a couple more minutes in this posture. So another suggestion for people who need a more intense experience, maybe you're all the way into your torso, now you can't go any further here, and you're still not feeling anything. If you want a more intense experience, for most of us, you can always practice Sleeping Swan. And I'll demonstrate Sleeping Swan quickly here. It's just right leg is in front, left leg is in back. And this is more commonly known as pigeon pose. So this belongs to the same family as Eye of the Needle pose. So if you know this posture, and you would prefer this over Eye of the Needle, this is an alternative that probably for most of us is more intense than Eye of the Needle. Although Eye of the Needle might be more intense for a few of us than Sleeping Swan is. About another minute or so if you're still in this pose. Again, notice your breath, notice how you're feeling. Give yourself permission to come out of a posture. Give yourself permission to change your edge depending on what you're experiencing. So pain is not useful. Injury and trauma, not useful in this practice. So if you're experiencing those are red flags telling you you're not at an appropriate edge. And that kind of dives into the first principle of this practice or any yoga practice. Harm, injury, trauma, pain, sharp biting, burning sensations, generally not useful. So those are the sensations that are telling you that something needs to change in how you're practicing here. That's the first principle of yin, is finding an appropriate edge. And it might take some experimentation to do so. Second principle is called stillness. Once you've found something appropriate, you resolve to stay for a while. And that while is the third principle, which is time. Time is to stay for a few minutes. Now we've been here a little over 3 minutes. So maybe one more breath, and if you're in Eye of the Needle pose or any other kind of version of this posture, gently release the left leg, let the left foot come back down onto the ground, release the right leg, and if you need to work out some kinks in this pose, I'm going to recommend reclined windshield wipers. So bring your feet fairly wide, maybe around mat width or so, and then lower the knees to one side, bring them up to center, lower them to the other side. You can just gently rock them back and forth for a few times. And then we'll go ahead and set up for the other side of Eye of the Needle. So both feet up, bring the feet in about hip width if they were out wide. And now the right foot first stays on the ground. Bring the left knee in towards the torso. And then bring it out wide to the left. Put the left ankle on the right thigh. You can stay here if you're already feeling a lot. You need to go more, but if you want to, then you start bringing that right leg in and clasping behind the right thigh or in front of the right shin. Or if you're wanting something even deeper, then do pigeon pose, do Sleeping Swan on this side. So your upper body should be comfortable. Head and neck are neutral, your shoulders are relaxed, your torso is relaxed. The emphasis of this pose is the hip opener in the legs, in the hips. So that's where we're trying to feel something, although just because you're feeling something somewhere else doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Just make sure it's not painful here. And then we'll hang out here for a couple more minutes. So I would like to bring one's awareness to our solar system, the system, the family of the sun, our star, and our local family of planets in the solar system. And in previous videos, I talked about Mars and Venus. So I'm going to talk about Mercury, the innermost planet to the sun. Mercury is one of the 4 small rocky terrestrial planets that are closest to the sun, of which Earth is one. And by the way, the Earth is the largest of those 4 little rocky planets. And Mercury is the smallest of the 4. So Mercury is roughly 1/3 the diameter of Earth, and it is actually 1/20th of the mass of Earth. So much, much smaller than Earth. Mercury also doesn't have much in the way of an atmosphere and is heavily cratered. So to approach Mercury and to understand Mercury, it's probably best to think about our own moon. So Mercury and the moon, on first appearance, seem to be very, very similar. These small, round, heavily cratered worlds with not much for an atmosphere. So if we don't know anything about Mercury, we start with thinking about Mercury as the moon, although what we've discovered scientifically is that Mercury is actually very different than the moon in many ways. Mercury is itself not a moon, but a planet in its own right, and the closest planet to the sun, which makes it a very hot world, but it also is a very cold world depending on what side is facing the sun. So maybe another minute here. Give yourself permission to come out of the posture if you've had enough of this one. Or if you've lost sensation, then maybe pull the legs in a little bit closer to the torso to re-engage or re-sense some kind of pressure, some kind of stopping point here. Maybe notice your breath a couple more times here as you continue to breathe softly in this slower practice. Even though Mercury is fairly close to the Earth, by the way, Earth is 93 million miles from the sun, Mercury, since it's the closest planet to the sun, is on average 36 million miles. 36 million miles from the sun here. So Venus, Earth, Mars, all in roughly the same neighborhood. But since Mercury is a lot closer, you'd expect it to be a lot hotter. And it is on the side that's facing the sun. The sun cooks it to a temperature of about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. On the far side, though, it gets really cold. In fact, it's one of the coldest places in the solar system when it gets down to minus 270 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cold there too. Mercury is a rather elusive planet. Since it's so close to the sun, it doesn't get far enough away from the sun to where we can see it very well. And since it's also so close to the sun, it orbits the sun rather quickly. It only takes 88 Earth days for Mercury to go one time around the sun. That's really fast. So in Greek mythology, where us Westerners get a lot of our myths from, Mercury, the planet, was assigned to the god, to the god Hermes, the messenger god of the Greek gods. Of course, the Romans borrowed all the Greek gods and renamed them, and the Romans renamed Hermes Mercury. So Mercury was the messenger god, and he was a messenger because he was fast. And this is one of the cases where the planet got named appropriately for the god it kind of described. They noticed that Mercury was a little bit of a speedster going around the sun, and so was the Greek or the Roman god that it was named after here. So you can go ahead and release this side of your hip opener of eye of the needle. And you can do something to work out the kinks if you're feeling some reverberation. Again, I like this reclined windshield wipers. You can slowly bob your knees back and forth if you wish, or you can just let them kind of just stay in one place for a while. Bring them back up. Move them to the other side for a while. Let them stay for a breath. Or any other kind of motion that you would like. And then when you're ready, slowly bring yourself up to seated. Our next yin posture is dragon pose. So eventually you'll make your way onto hands and knees. Come into a tabletop position. Dragon is this basic low lunge. So bring your right foot forward, in between your hands, inch the left knee back, and then let things sink and soften. Now you can use as much padding as you need for this pose. So if any part of that back leg is feeling sharp burning pressure, the knee, the ankle, somewhere along the shin, maybe the top of the foot, then by all means, place extra padding there. The same thing might happen up front. Maybe you find that your torso, your arms don't reach the ground. It's really nice to have stability, a little bit of stability with your arms. So if they're not making it to the ground, then use some kind of height. I've got yoga blocks here. If you don't have yoga blocks, then maybe you can find some books, or maybe even some wooden boards that you can use here. And this is basic dragon pose, so we'll stay here. We'll stay here for a few minutes on this side. And the idea is to try to soften the very places that we're feeling pressure. Now, for many people, typically, we're feeling pressure in the back thigh, or maybe through the hips somewhere. And that's what dragon is. It's another type of hip opener here. This basic runner's lunge. You can do variations. So if you're wanting to get more into the hip, you can do low flying dragon, which is coming down onto your forearms, bringing the right foot up to the side. You can do high flying dragon, which gets more into the back leg here. And it's a little bit more yang in nature because there's a little bit more balance involved. Some of us, no type of dragon actually works for us. So an alternative you can do is I call it inverted dragon, but its more common name is half happy baby pose. So if dragon is not working for you, make your way onto your back. Left leg's extended. Bring the right knee in towards your chest, and then maybe over to your armpit just a little bit. Raise your right shin. See if you can walk your hands up the right shin and clasp the bottom of the right leg. And then you can use your arms to gently pull that leg down, just as far as it goes. So this is inverted dragon. It still gets into the hips, although it's not so intense on the psoas and the thigh of the left leg here. So it's a nice alternative to try. Otherwise, if regular dragon is fine, we'll just stay here in regular dragon for another minute and a half or so. Again, that's by me keeping track. You can give yourself permission to come out early or stay longer. Remember, this is just a video, so you can always ignore it, pause it, back it up, replay it. Whatever you would like to do here so that you can get the amount of time that you want in each posture. So the interesting thing about Mercury is that one of the initial interesting things about Mercury is its orbit. Its orbit around the sun is so close to the sun that even though it has a fast orbit, it's also kind of an eccentric orbit. It's more elliptical than the other planets. So all the planets in the solar system have an elliptical orbit, although they're fairly stable and close to circular. Well, Mercury's orbit is the least circular of all the major planets. It's more elongated and oval shaped. That means it gets really close into the sun and then it moves really far out. It deviates from an average distance much more than the other planets do. And that has some consequences. That sets it up for a very strange resonance because of the tidal forces experiences from the sun as it gets closer and moves farther away here. One more breath here in dragon pose, and then we can come out of dragon. So if you're in dragon, I can suggest this counter pose. We'll try to move into downward facing dog. Tuck the back toes, plant the hands, lift the back knee up, and see if you can engage muscles now. We're going into a yang attitude here. See if you can slowly push yourself up into a downward facing dog. And then when you get there, if you like downward facing dog or other exercises here, you can do three-legged dog, you can take your dog for a walk. Or if you don't like downward facing dog, then you can just ignore everything I've said and do something else, maybe some cat and cows. And psych yourself up for the other side of dragon, which we'll do now. This time it's the opposite foot in front. So left foot comes up in front, inch the right knee back. Find your version of dragon, then you might have to take some time to set up some padding or some props to help with this pose, or maybe upside down dragon. And then we'll get started here on this side. So come back to your breath. See if there's muscles that don't need to be engaged, although some of them might have to be engaged. Head can be in a neutral position, it can hang. You can use blocks or books to prop your head up, since the head is not really part of the pose here. And then notice the sensations here. So Mercury takes 88 days to go around the sun once. Its rotation period is 58 days, which is what that means is Mercury rotates exactly 3 times in the amount of time it takes to go around the sun twice. This is rather odd. This is rather interesting, and it's called a resonance. And it's due to the fact that it has such an elongated orbit and is so close to the sun. So again, it has a very long day. Actually, that's a star day. So that's the 58 days is how long it takes to make a complete journey around its axis with respect to the stars. A solar day, because it's sidereal day or star day or one rotation takes so long. An actual solar day on Mercury takes 178 Earth days, which is 2 Mercury years. So Mercury goes around the sun twice before it actually sees one solar day. There's some more oddities about that. So because of its odd rotation and because of its odd orbit, there are times when the sun from the surface of Mercury appears to stop and reverse direction. So if we lived on Mercury, we'd have this strange coincidence where we would watch the sun move across the sky, it would pause, it would back up, and then it would change directions again and continue moving. This also sets up for odd things like double sunsets or double sunrises. The sun would set, it would rise shortly, and then it would set again. And the same thing for sunrise here. So astrologers on Earth get really excited when Mercury goes into retrograde motion, which is a reverse motion with respect to the stars, as seen from Earth, which is just a geometric effect. But they get really excited if they lived on the surface of Mercury and saw the sun reverse direction here. We can reverse our intention here now. We spend enough time here in Dragon. So you can either come up into downward facing dog again, slowly, gently, or come into a yang posture. So downward facing dog is not a yin pose, it's a yang pose. Muscles need to be engaged to create a sense of rootedness and expansion in downward facing dog, which is good things to do in between long held yin postures. But again, not all of us are big fans of downward facing dog, so I'm going to do something else for a while. We'll feel the reverberation where you're feeling it in dragon pose, and we'll set up for the next yin posture. The next yin posture is called half shoelace, and there'll be an alternative for this one. Half shoelace is a seated forward fold, and if you have a lot of stiffness in the backs of your legs and your back body like I do, probably a good idea to sit up on some height. It can be a blanket or some pillows, or in my case, I'm going to choose a block to sit on. Legs are extended out in front. And then bend the right leg. Bend the right knee and stack the right knee on top of the left knee. So the right foot, the right ankle, is somewhere around my left hip now. Left leg, you can move it around a little bit. You can actually move it to the right if that kind of works better to stack right legs here. So this is the posture, this is half shoelace. We can add a forward fold to this, but pause here and notice if you're feeling a lot of intensity somewhere. And if that's the case, this is where you can stay. If you're needing a little bit more oomph, the next stage to this is to fold forward any amount until you feel a stopping point, until you feel enough pressure here. And then you can let your torso round, your head and neck hang. If you don't like your head and neck hanging, you can maybe build some props to rest your head and your neck on. Maybe there's too much intensity in this bottom leg. So putting a micro bend in it and maintaining it, I made a roll out of some blankets here. Putting that under your knee to keep it slightly bent might help with the intensity here. Because again, we'll try to stay here. If folding forward is too intense, but sitting straight up like this is acceptable, then maybe don't fold forward. But if you can fold forward, maybe try that. Now there's some people out there that none of this is working for them. Just causes too much trauma, too much pain. So an alternative posture to do, so looks a little bit different like this, is to bring yourself onto your back. This you can do hand to big toe pose. So come to your back, legs extended out long, and then you'll need something like a strap or a towel. Bring your left knee in and wrap the strap or the towel on the bottom of the left foot, and then extend the left leg straight. Clasp the strap with both hands. Rest your head, neck, shoulders, torso comfortably on the ground. And then trying to keep the leg relatively straight, or as straight as you can get it. Notice my leg probably still has a considerable bend in it. And then slowly bring the strap up until you're feeling enough pressure in the back of this leg. So this is a nice alternative to half shoelace if half shoelace is too intense. And you can just stay here. Find your edge by moving the leg around till you're feeling enough pressure. Otherwise, we'll come back to this half shoelace pose here. And it's always a good idea for me to have a little bit of micro bend in my leg here. So since Mercury doesn't get so very far from the sun, even though it's a close neighbor to the Earth, it's hard to pick out from the glare of the sun. It's usually behind, in front of, or too close to the sun to actually see. the only chances we get to see Mercury, and Mercury is bright enough that it is easily visible to the naked eye when it's far enough away from the sun that we can see it. It's not as bright as Venus, it's not as bright as Mars, but it is something that we can see. When it gets to the farthest point from the sun and the Earth is just in the right place in its orbit to where we have enough of a separation between it and the sun that we can actually glance at it briefly before sunrise or sunset. And it actually can be seen, but it's always in twilight. It's always in dawn or twilight. So you can never see it when it's completely dark out. The sun is always on the verge of coming up or just setting. So you're always chasing Mercury in the twilight. And you kind of have to know where to look, and you kind of have to know how bright Mercury is to realize that you've actually seen Mercury because of all of that elusiveness. Turns out Mercury is a planet that most people have never seen and most people will never see because we're just not digging into the twilight of the sun. We don't have a clear enough horizon line to actually catch Mercury before the sun gets too bright or before Mercury sets. We can come out of this side of half shoelace here. So slowly bring yourself up. If you fold it forward, unfold the half shoelace leg. And then a little bit of maybe just point and flex your feet a few times or rock your legs back and forth here. And then set up for the other side when you're ready of half shoelace. So again, legs extended out front. Sit up on some height if you need to. Again, if you're really loose in the back side of your legs, you maybe don't need any height, although there's some reasons why sitting up on a little height is still a good idea, even if you're an extremely flexible person. Right leg is straight, bend the left knee. Stack the left knee on top of the right leg here to start out in half shoelace. Maybe you need a soft prop underneath that leg here. You can stay here with a nice long spine, or you can begin to fold forward here. And then we'll stay here for a few more minutes or so. Or maybe you want to do a hand to big toe pose with a strap on this side. Or you could even do it without a strap. Just hold the right leg here. I have to admit, this is probably one of the most intense in postures for me. And just for my own one anecdote example, you'll notice that I'm not folding forward very far. That doesn't really have to do with flexibility in my torso. I'm folding to my edge, and my edge, the pressure that I'm feeling is in the back, so I'm letting the pressure that I feel, the sensations here dictate how far forward I go. And this is how far forward I can go until I reach my edge. Any farther, and I'm in pain. So getting back to Mercury, of course, because of its close, odd orbit, it's elusive to see. It has a strange orbital and rotation pattern. It gets even weirder because even when you take into account its strange rotation pattern, early astronomers still couldn't work out all the weird deviations that Mercury makes in its orbit. Even with well-established Newtonian and Kepler orbital mechanics, there's still some weird issues with where Venus was, and to the point where people began to believe there must be even another planet closer to the sun than Mercury. And they started looking for it. And they called that planet Vulcan. And there was a huge search for this new planet Vulcan to explain the extra deviations that Mercury made in its orbit. And the planet Vulcan was never found. What did happen was Einstein's theory of relativity, where instead of gravity simply treated like with the old theory of Kepler and Newtonian mechanics, that Einstein applied his new theory of space-time. And the sun was a huge gravity well that was warping space-time. And Mercury was small enough and closest to this extreme warping of space-time that when you apply Einstein's general theory of relativity to Mercury's orbit, it explains the extra deviations that astronomers could not explain with ordinary Kepler mechanics, which, by the way, very well explains the other planets' orbits because they're farther away, much more circular, much more stable than Mercury's orbit. So that was a win for Einstein's general theory of relativity. It kind of wiped away these other nagging problems with Mercury's orbit here. Just one more breath here on this side if you stayed here the whole time, and then slowly bring yourself up and out of either hand to big toe pose or this half shoelace pose that we're doing. Slowly begin to unfold yourself, expand a bit here, and maybe make little motions to work out the stagnations here. So the last long-held yin posture will be butterfly pose, which is also a hip opener. Now you'll come to sit. I don't need to sit on quite so much height for this one. And you'll have to decide if you need to sit on more height. So for butterfly, legs are extended out long initially. Bend your knees, bring the bottoms of your feet together, and lower your knees out to either side. How close your heels are into your hips is kind of a preference up to you. I'm going to suggest you can go ahead and keep them pretty far from the hips to make kind of a diamond pattern with your shins and your thighs. And then you can just stay here if you're feeling lots of lovely pressure in the legs, in the inner thighs already. But if you want to, the next stage is a forward fold to butterfly. So maybe hinge forward from the hip sockets and then let the rest of your torso soften and round. And you can use any props you want to pad your torso and your head, or you can let it hang in mid-air. Again, this is adapting to a useful practice for you. And then we'll stay here for a few minutes. So just recently, we've sent kind of a modern probe to Mercury, the probe Messenger. And it turns out it's just as hard to send a probe to a planet that's close to the sun as it is to send a probe spacecraft to the outer reaches of the solar system. It took several years and several flybys of other planets to get this probe close enough to Mercury where it could actually get into orbit. So the probe was named Messenger. Messenger, of course, an acronym that matches the messenger of the gods, the name Mercury. Your Messenger came into orbit so it could do some chemical analysis and some physical analysis of the planet's properties. It found something odd about Mercury. Most planets, the interior of most planets are usually made up of some sort of very dense metal core, like iron and nickel, and then a very thick, lighter mantle, and finally a very thin and sometimes pretty deep crust. This is typical of Earth and Mars and Venus. But what they found around Mercury is Mercury has essentially very little mantle or crust at all. It's almost all metallic core. So it's a big ball of iron with a tiny little crust on top of it. It's very bizarre for these typical rocky planets. And in the crust, what they found was very volatile chemicals. Now what that means is volatile chemicals are subject to just evaporating away under heat and pressure. And Mercury sees a lot of heat and pressure from the sun. So those volatile chemicals should have evaporated and disappeared a long time ago. And yet there's still traces of them there. The implication is there must have been a lot more of them on Mercury at some point in time for there to be any left at this point in time. That doesn't make any sense considering how close Mercury is to the sun. So because it has no typical mantle or crust. And because it still has some of these volatile chemicals, one of the new theories that's being proposed about Mercury is that it formed farther away from the sun than it is now. They're thinking that maybe it formed in the realm of where Earth is, and at some point it collided with a very large object that stripped it of its initial mantle and crust and only left the core behind. And that would explain why it had initially retained a lot of volatile of chemicals, and why it's now just basically a big iron core next to the sun.
So about 3 more breaths here in butterfly. Maybe you have to make an adjustment here to go deeper or to go less deep here. And when you feel ready though to come out, maybe plant your hands on the floor, use your hands and your arms to push yourself up to center. Bring your knees very gently in, extend your legs out, maybe point and flex your feet a few times. That was the last long-held major yin posture before resting. We'll do a little bit of integration. And so I will suggest a little bit of a yang integration. We'll do some bridge cycling here. So slowly make your way onto your back. Knees bent, feet on the floor, about hip width apart. Head and neck comfortably resting on the floor here. Arms extended along your sides, palms face down just for a sense of rootedness, and root through your shoulders and through your feet. And then maybe on an exhale, begin to tip your tailbone to try to point up towards the ceiling. And then go ahead and tilt your pelvic bone the other way. So now the top of your pelvic bone is trying to point up towards the ceiling. So you're doing this very gentle rocking. You're using the muscles around your lumbar, and you're increasing and decreasing the lumbar curve. You're going to use this to move up into bridge. So maybe on your next inhale, tilt your tailbone down towards the ground. Push through your feet and your shoulders and use your muscles to lift your hips up towards the ceiling just as far as they go. And then very gently lower yourself down, maybe just on one breath. We'll do that cycle again. So maybe inhale to lift your hips up towards the ceiling. Again, this is yang yoga. So muscle engagement here. And then on your exhale, with control, slowly lower everything back down to the ground. We'll do the bridge one more time and we'll stay for a while. So maybe inhale and lift your hips, and then breathe normally as you maybe maintain this. You can do some other things like clasping your hands underneath the backside of your torso. Maybe you can rock the heads of your arm bones underneath your rib cage here. Again, keep pressing through your feet and your shoulders and see if you can press your hips up just a little bit higher here. And then release your hands, release your shoulders if you did that, and slowly lower yourself back down. And then when you get down, you can slowly hug your knees into your chest. You can rock from side to side. Any other kind of little integration movements that you want to make here. Any other kind of motions that you would like to make before we move into our final resting posture. So now we're moving into Shavasana to take rest for a few minutes. You can just lie on your back, arms and legs extended. Any kind of soft props that you would like. Maybe it's chilly and you want some warmth, so cover yourself with a blanket, or maybe a pillow underneath your head. I'm going to suggest legs up the wall pose. So you'll need some wall space for this, or clear some wall space. And then I like a little bit of padding, but you can have padding, you can maybe not have padding. The hardest part about legs up the wall is getting into legs up the wall. So I find it easiest to sit next to the wall sideways, and then roll my torso down towards the floor and roll my feet up towards the ceiling to get my legs against the wall. And this might take a couple of attempts here. And then
Try to get your hips as close to the wall. If you have a lot of tightness in your back body, you're not going to get your hips to touch the wall, and that's okay. And then extend your legs out, maybe point and flex the feet a few times. Get settled here. Arms extended along either side, far enough from your waist so that maybe your palms face up towards the ceiling. And you can put a pillow underneath your head here. And then soften and settle here. Again, if this is not your favorite resting pose, find one that is. And release here. So this is a good time to notice any residual tension up in your head and then soften it. So maybe wiggle your jaw around and then let it soften. Wiggle your tongue around, let it soften. Cheeks, gums, teeth, all trying to soften here. And then expand that softening. So get up into your eyes, let your eye sockets soften, and maybe that space in between your eyes. The skin around your ears relaxing and releasing. Maybe your temples and your forehead, that strain kind of drain away. The very crown of your head softening. Take all that tension and let it drain out through that contact point that your head is making with the ground, if you're lying on the ground here. Release your thoughts. And when I say release your thoughts, what we really mean is your thoughts will still be there. They'll still be drifting around. They'll still be generated by your brain. And the idea is you don't engage in your thoughts. Just let your thoughts flow through freely, without judgment, without criticism, without engagement. So that we don't react to our thoughts here. Let them be whatever they are. Let your body be whatever it is, just for a moment here, so that it can rest. Notice the gentle rise and fall of your breath. Shoulders are relaxed, collarbone is broad, your rib cage and abdomen is released, your arms are soft, fingers are soft. Maybe you can feel that gentle tingling in the tips of your fingers. Hips and legs are soft. Feet relaxed, toes soft. Maybe you can notice some gentle energy in the tips of all of your toes. And then bring yourself back to your breath. And continue to soften, continue to sublimate. As you allow yourself, as you give yourself permission to simply exist and to simply be. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. You can make little motions with toes and with fingers. Maybe expand that motion into feet, into hands. Maybe you can start to move your legs back and forth. Maybe arms move slightly. If you're practicing legs up the wall pose, gently bend your knees, draw your feet down, maybe place them against the wall. If you can maybe push yourself away from the wall an inch or two, and then slowly and gently roll over onto one side. When you get there, stay there for a moment. Allow yourself kind of find a new equilibrium here. Let everything soften. And while you're also here, you can give yourself a big thank you, and create gratitude for your practice, and also for you, your unique embodiment in the solar system, in this entire universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you're ready, gently bring yourself up to a comfortable seat. Once you've established your roots, once you have connected with your inner ground, bring your hands together at heart center. I'll end practice with an Om. You can either join in or just simply listen. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.